Imagine the sound of a 350-pound man's confidence, shattering like crystal against concrete, followed by silence, so complete, it seemed to swallow light itself. Las Vegas, November 14th, 1970. Frank Sinatra's private dressing room. 6 witnesses. 11 seconds that redefined the laws of physics and left the most feared bodyguard in entertainment on his knees, staring at a simple black bow tie that had just become the most important piece of fabric in combat history. You probably think you know how this story ends. The chairman of the board, Frank Sinatra, protected by Big Anthony Torrino, 6 inches of pure Italian-American muscle, 350 pounds of enforcer, who had broken the bones of photographers and intimidated mob figures, standing across from Bruce Lee, 5'7", 135 pounds, a martial artist most people still knew as Kato from the Green Hornet. The math seems simple. The outcome appears inevitable. Physics demands a certain result. You're about to learn how magnificently wrong mathematics can be when it meets mastery. The Sands Hotel, 1970. Frank doesn't just perform here. He rules here. Tonight is invitation only. Hollywood royalty and political figures, packed into the Copa room. Backstage hums with controlled chaos. Security everywhere, but discreet. Men in $3,000 suits, who look invisible and intimidating simultaneously. At the center stands Anthony Torrino, 8 years protecting Frank from obsessed fans who climbed hotel facades, mob figures who thought reputation gave them access, photographers who wouldn't respect boundaries. In his world, problems are solved through overwhelming physical force. There has never been a problem that 350 pounds of controlled aggression couldn't solve. Until tonight. Bruce Lee arrives at George Lazenby's invitation. The Bond actor, hoping to introduce him to influential Hollywood figures. Bruce enters through the main guest entrance, but Anthony's security network immediately notices Asian male, approximately 5'7", 140 pounds. Casual dress guest of Lazenby. Anthony processes this with professional detachment. Asian martial arts instructors have been appearing in Hollywood lately, mostly harmless fitness instructors with delusions of grandeur. But something about this particular guest bothers him. Maybe it's how Bruce moves through backstage, not with nervous celebrity-struck energy, but with calm territorial assessment. Maybe it's how other guests react, not dismissive glances, usually reserved for hangers-on, but genuine curiosity and respect. Or maybe it's something more primitive. One apex predator, recognizing another across species lines. Anthony finds Bruce in a corridor near Frank's dressing room, explaining combat principles to studio executives, using precise hand movements to illustrate leverage and timing. Anthony approaches with the purposeful stride that has ended conversations for 8 years. "Excuse me," Anthony says, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Mr. Sinatra's about to start his private set. This area needs to be cleared." Bruce looks up with dark eyes that reveal nothing. "Of course. Where would you like us to go?" The response is perfectly reasonable, completely cooperative, and somehow irritating in ways Anthony can't articulate. There's no deference to the implicit threat Anthony represents. It's like being ignored by someone paying complete attention. "You can rejoin the main party," Anthony says, his tone carrying the subtle edge that usually motivates immediate compliance. Actually, one of the executives interjects, "We were hoping to continue our conversation with Mr. Lee. His insights about action choreography are fascinating." Anthony's jaw tightens imperceptibly. People don't negotiate with his directives. They acknowledge his authority and comply. The fact that Bruce's mere presence is encouraging others to resist Anthony's control is troubling. "Mr. Lee can share his insights in the main party area," Anthony says, his voice dropping half an octave into the register that precedes violence. This is a restricted space. Bruce nods agreeably. I understand. Security is important. I appreciate the complexity of your job. Protecting someone like Mr. Sinatra must require constant vigilance. It's perfectly respectful, but delivered with calm certainty that makes Anthony suddenly aware of how his bulk might be perceived as compensation rather than advantage. That's right, Anthony says. And part of that job means knowing who belongs where and when. Absolutely, Bruce agrees. In my line of work, spatial awareness is also crucial. Understanding how people move through space, how they respond to pressure, how they react when they feel their territory is being invaded. The words hang like expensive smoke. On the surface, Bruce is agreeing with Anthony's security assessment. Beneath that surface, currents flow that transforms simple crowd control into something more dangerous. Anthony realizes this conversation has become a test, though he's not sure who is testing whom. Walking away now would represent defeat his professional reputation cannot afford. Mr. Lee, he says, stepping closer, using his height and bulk in the way that has solved problems for 8 years. I think there might be some confusion about what kind of skills are actually useful in this environment. Bruce looks up, 6 inches up, a distance that should emphasize his disadvantage, but somehow doesn't, and smiles slightly. The kind where people think movie fighting has anything to do with real-world security situations. The kind where someone might overestimate their capabilities because they've impressed people who don't know the difference between performance and reality. The executives exchange glances. Lazenby steps backward. The corridor temperature seems to drop several degrees. Bruce considers Anthony's words with careful attention. When he responds, his voice carries no heat, no offense, just genuine curiosity. What do you think the difference is? Anthony gestures to himself. The breadth of his shoulders, thickness of his arms, simple physical reality of his presence. This is the difference. Size, strength, real-world experience. When someone needs to be stopped, philosophy doesn't stop them. Physics stops them. Physics, Bruce repeats thoughtfully. Yes, physics is important. Leverage, momentum, conservation of energy. How force transfers through structures. He pauses. Would you like to see how physics works in real situations? The question is asked with such genuine politeness that it takes Anthony a moment to recognize it as a challenge. When he does, his response is immediate. Yeah, I would. What happens next violates every rule of professional security work. You don't engage in physical confrontations with guests. You don't escalate situations beyond minimum necessary force. But 8 years of successfully intimidating people through sheer presence has created habits difficult to break. Storage room, Anthony says quietly, nodding toward a door 20 feet down the corridor. Bruce looks at the door, then back at Anthony. You're sure about this? I'm sure. The storage room is 15 feet square, filled with entertainment logistics, detritus, spare microphone stands, promotional materials, stage costumes, cleaning supplies. In the center, barely enough space for 2 men to stand without crowding. Anthony removes his suit jacket with careful precision, hanging it on a costume rack. Underneath, his white dress shirt strains against decades of muscle. He loosens his black bow tie and lets it hang loose around his neck. Bruce stands in the center, hands relaxed, breathing calmly. He assesses the new environment, exits, obstacles, how sound might travel through walls. Same rules as outside? Bruce asks. You want to see how physics works? Anthony settles into a stance, drawing on 20 years of street fighting. Weight, balanced, hands up, but not formal. Feet positioned for offense or defense. His reach advantage is enormous, nearly 8 inches. His weight advantage overwhelming, 215 pounds. In this confined space, his bulk should limit Bruce's mobility while maximizing Anthony's ability to apply crushing force. Just so we understand each other, Anthony says, I'm not looking to hurt you, just to demonstrate some real-world facts about size and strength. Bruce nods. I understand, and I appreciate your restraint, though I should mention, in my experience, the most dangerous misconception about physics is thinking force always travels in straight lines. Before Anthony can process this, Bruce moves, not toward Anthony, not backward for distance, not circling for angles, instead, forward and to the side, repositioning, changing confrontation geometry in ways Anthony's strategic planning didn't account for. Anthony reacts instinctively, turning to track Bruce's movement, bringing hands up to defend against an attack that doesn't come. Bruce stands 3 feet to Anthony's left, still calm, still balanced, making no aggressive movements. Force and direction, Bruce says conversationally, as if conducting physics lecture rather than engaging in potential violence. Most people think about force as traveling point A to point B, but force is about systems, how energy moves through structures, how small changes in one place create large effects somewhere else. Anthony turns to face him squarely, frustrated by how Bruce's repositioning has made the bigger man feel like he's chasing rather than controlling. Less talking, more demonstrating. As you wish. Bruce's right hand moves, not fast enough to be invisible, but fast enough that Anthony's brain, trained to recognize conventional attacks, doesn't catalog it as threat until too late. The hand touches Anthony's wrist, not grabbing, not striking, just making contact with fingertips that feel like iron points. Anthony tries pulling his arm back, discovers his wrist is somehow locked by pressure from Bruce's thumb and forefinger, tries using his other hand to break the grip, finds Bruce has moved again, now standing to his side, maintaining wrist control while avoiding the reaching hand. Pressure points, Bruce explains calmly, his fingers finding spots on Anthony's wrist that send sharp pain jolts up his arm. The nervous system has weak points unrelated to muscle mass. Size doesn't protect them. Strength doesn't strengthen them. Anthony tries muscling out of the hold, putting his full 350 pounds behind the effort. The wrist pain intensifies. His hand goes numb. His fingers lose strength, opening involuntarily. Structure, Bruce continues, using his free hand to guide Anthony's locked arm into a position, making the bigger man lean forward awkwardly, off balance, unable to plant his feet properly. The human body is a lever system. If you understand pivot points, you can control entire structure, regardless of mass. Anthony realizes he's in real trouble. Not amateur hour challenge he expected, but a situation where his vast experience has become meaningless. He tries grabbing Bruce with his free hand, using size to simply overpower through brute force. Bruce's left foot sweeps Anthony's right ankle at the exact moment Anthony's weight is transitioning. Simple physics, a structure under stress, pushed beyond balance point, must fall. Anthony's 350 pounds, no longer supported by proper stance, obey gravity with ruthless efficiency. The big man goes down hard, his shoulder striking concrete with a sound like dropped beef. His loose bow tie slides off his neck and lies on the floor beside him, like a period at sentence end. The entire sequence, from first contact to Anthony on the ground, has taken 11 seconds. Lazenby and the studio executive stand frozen by the door trying to process what they've witnessed. The confined space that should have favored the larger fighter has become a physics laboratory where basic assumptions about force and leverage have been disproven with surgical precision. Anthony lies on the floor, not injured, but stunned, his brain struggling to reconcile years of experience with being controlled and defeated by someone half his size. His wrist burns, where Bruce's fingers found pressure points most people don't know exist. His shoulder aches, where it hit concrete. But more than physical discomfort, what bothers him is complete loss of control, feeling moved around like a chess piece by an opponent playing a different game entirely. Bruce stands over him, not celebrating, not gloating, just waiting with the same calm patience he showed before confrontation began. His breathing is normal, his clothes unwrinkled. He looks like someone who just finished explaining a mathematical concept. The physics demonstration, Bruce says quietly, offering his hand. Was that helpful? Anthony stares at the offered hand. Every instinct screams to refuse help. Get up alone, salvage reputation from this humiliation. But another part, the part that has survived violent encounters by learning rather than denying, recognizes something important just happened, something deserving respect rather than resentment. He takes Bruce's hand. Bruce pulls him up with surprising strength, steady and controlled, ensuring Anthony is balanced. Before releasing grip, Anthony stands, brushing concrete dust from his shirt, his mind working to understand what happened and what it means. How? The word comes out rougher than intended. 27 years of study, Bruce says simply. Understanding that the human body is a machine. Machines have optimal operating parameters and failure points. Size can mask failure points, but doesn't eliminate them. Anthony picks up his bow tie, loops it around his neck, without bothering to retie it. His hands shake slightly, not from fear, but adrenaline crash, following realization of how completely he misjudged this situation. In my line of work, he says slowly, I've dealt with tough guys, boxers, wrestlers, soldiers, convicts. I thought I knew what real fighting looked like. Bruce nods. You do know what real fighting looks like. What you experienced wasn't fighting. It was problem solving. I didn't defeat you. I demonstrated that the problem you thought we were solving wasn't the problem we were actually solving. Lazenby finds his voice. Jesus Christ, Bruce. Where did you learn that? Hong Kong, Oakland, Los Angeles. Anywhere you can find people willing to test understanding against reality. Bruce looks at Anthony. Your job is protection. My job is understanding how protection fails. We're in complementary fields. Anthony laughs. Not with humor, but bitter recognition of how thoroughly he's been outclassed. Complementary. Right. He pauses. Mr. Sinatra should hear about this. 10 minutes later, the 6 witnesses stand in Frank Sinatra's private dressing room. Frank sits in a leather chair, costing more than most cars. Still wearing his performance tuxedo, tumbler of Jack Daniels in his manicured hand. The room smells like expensive cologne and lingering cigarette smoke. Anthony stands to Frank's right, his retied bow tie perfectly knotted, but somehow different, as if fabric remembers being on a storage room floor. His professional composure is intact, but those who know him well might notice subtle changes, slight hesitation in movements, new attentiveness to spatial relationships. Bruce sits across from Frank, in a matching chair, looking comfortable but alert. The size difference is dramatic here, in intimate space, but power dynamic has shifted in ways everyone present can feel but only Anthony fully understands. Frank studies Bruce with intense interest of someone who has spent 50 years reading people. He's heard Anthony's report, delivered in clipped professional language that conceals more than it reveals. Mr. Lee demonstrated superior technical knowledge. Traditional approaches proved inadequate. Recommends security consultation. But Frank didn't build his empire, accepting reports at face value. He wants to understand what happened in that storage room. Anthony tells me you gave him a lesson in physics, Frank says, his voice carrying distinctive rhythm that made him famous for speaking as much as singing. He was curious about practical applications of martial arts training. Bruce replies diplomatically. I showed him some basic principles. Frank's blue eyes narrow with amusement. Basic principles that put a 350-pound ex-convict on his ass in 11 seconds, 10 seconds of which were explanation. Bruce clarifies. The actual demonstration took about 1 second. Frank laughs. Genuine appreciation. Christ, you don't bullshit, do you? I like that. He sips whiskey. Anthony's been with me 8 years. Dealt with mob muscle, crazy fans, armed robbers. Never seen him look like someone just explained quantum mechanics using his body as blackboard. Anthony shifts slightly, but doesn't comment. His loyalty to Frank is absolute, but new respect for Bruce is complicating simple protection mathematics he's relied on for years. Mr. Torrino is very skilled, Bruce says. His positioning was excellent. Situational awareness professional. Physical capabilities formidable. The only issue was assumptions about how force works in confined spaces. And what assumptions were those? Bruce considers his answer carefully. Sinatra isn't a man who appreciates kid gloves, but deserves more than technical explanations for what amounts to fundamental challenge to his security worldview. He assumed larger forces always overcome smaller ones, Bruce says finally. In most situations, that's true. But martial arts studies exceptions to that rule. Places where technique can redirect force, where understanding structure can overcome mass, where timing can defeat strength. Frank sets down whiskey and leans forward, interest clearly engaged. Show me. I beg your pardon? Show me these exceptions. Frank stands up, movement fluid despite expensive suit and evening's bourbon effects. I want to see what Anthony saw. Bruce looks at Anthony, who nods almost imperceptibly. Not permission, but acknowledgement. This request falls within bounds of protecting Frank by helping him understand potential threats. The demonstration that follows becomes part of Sinatra legend, though only 6 people witness it, and only 3 ever speak of it. Years later, when principles are beyond caring about publicity, Bruce shows Frank how pressure points control larger opponents without injury, how leverage moves apparently immovable objects, how timing and positioning make strength irrelevant. He uses Frank as willing test subject, demonstrating with gentle precision how traditional physical confrontation ideas rely on assumptions trained martial artists learn to violate. Frank approaches the lesson with professionalism that made him successful everywhere else. He asks intelligent questions, wants to understand not just techniques but principles behind them, makes connections between what Bruce shows and situations he's encountered in his own complex relationship with danger. So if some gorilla grabs me, Frank says, allowing Bruce to demonstrate wrist escape, I don't need to be stronger than him. You need to be smarter about structure, Bruce confirms, guiding Frank through the movement. Feel how grip strength disappears when angle changes. Frank executes the technique slowly, face showing concentration of someone learning new skills. When he feels leverage work, when he understands positioning defeats power, his expression shifts to something like wonder. Son of a bitch, he says quietly. It's like magic, except it makes sense. Exactly, Bruce says. Magic that makes sense. That's what effective martial arts should be. They work for 20 minutes, Frank learning basic escape and evasion concepts, while Bruce explains philosophy behind each technique. Not comprehensive, that would take years, but enough to give Frank different understanding of what's possible when traditional approaches fail. When the lesson ends, Frank pours another whiskey, offers one to Bruce, who politely declines. Other witnesses maintain respectful silence, understanding they're observing something never to be repeated or discussed. Bruce, Frank says finally, I want to hire you. I'm honored, but I'm not looking for security work, not as bodyguard, as consultant, someone who can teach my people what you just taught me. Help us think about problems we didn't know we had. Bruce considers this. Understanding Frank's offer represents more than employment. It's recognition, validation from someone whose approval carries weight in worlds beyond martial arts. I'm willing to discuss it, Bruce says carefully. But you should understand what I teach requires people to question everything they think they know about fighting. Some security staff might find that challenging. Frank glances at Anthony, who watched the entire demonstration with focused attention of a professional student. Anthony, think you can handle learning new tricks? Anthony considers the question seriously. 8 years ago, he would have dismissed learning anything from someone half his size. Tonight has been educational, in ways extending far beyond martial arts technique. I think, Anthony says slowly, I've learned more in the last hour than the previous 8 years. If Mr. Lee is willing to teach, I'm willing to learn. Frank grins with genuine pleasure. Outstanding. Bruce, you've got yourself a consulting gig. We'll work out details tomorrow. He raises his glass to physics and teachers who can demonstrate lessons without putting students in the hospital. As the group prepares to return to what's left of the party, Frank pulls Bruce aside. One question. Anthony's a good man, but he's got an ego. You could have humiliated him tonight, could have made him look foolish in front of people who matter. Why didn't you? Bruce considers the question. Understanding Frank is asking about more than demonstration technique. He's asking about character, about how power should be used when available. Because humiliation teaches nothing except resentment, Bruce says. Mr. Torrino came into that storage room, believing he understood fighting. He left knowing his understanding was incomplete. That's more valuable than simply being defeated. Frank nods slowly. And if he'd been someone else, someone who couldn't handle that lesson with dignity, then I would have used different teaching methods, Bruce says simply. The goal is always education. Methods depend on the student. Frank extends his hand. Bruce shakes it, feeling strength in the older man's grip. Calluses from years gripping microphones and dealing with live performance demands. Bruce, Frank says, I think this is the beginning of a very interesting friendship. The friendship that develops over following months will indeed be interesting, built on mutual respect between two men, understanding the relationship between performance and authenticity. But it will also be brief, ended by Bruce's death in July 1973. Just as he's beginning to achieve global recognition, his revolutionary martial arts approach deserves. The consulting arrangement, however, produces immediate results. Anthony becomes one of Bruce's most dedicated students, approaching Jeet Kune Do with the same intensity he once brought to intimidation. The Sands security team develops capabilities, setting new standards for entertainment industry personal protection. Frank himself, though never pursuing formal martial arts training, incorporates Bruce's principles into his understanding of navigating dangerous situations without relying solely on others' muscle. But that night, November 14th, 1970, ends with 6 men sharing a secret lasting decades. In a storage room backstage at the Sands Hotel, physics was redefined in 11 seconds, assumptions shattered with surgical precision, and a 350-pound professional enforcer learned true strength sometimes comes in very small packages. The black bow tie was retied and returned to formal function. But Anthony would later say, every time he knotted it, he remembered the sound it made, hitting concrete, and the lesson about leverage that followed. Some secrets are kept, not because they're shameful, but because they're too profound for casual conversation. In the entertainment capital, where image often matters more than reality, 6 men witnessed reality assert itself with quiet authority over every assumption they thought they could trust. Today, more than 50 years later, the Sands Hotel exists only in photographs and memories. The storage room, where physics was redefined, is now empty air above the Las Vegas Strip. Frank Sinatra passed away in 1998, taking with him first-hand knowledge of learning that everything you thought you knew about strength might be incomplete. Anthony Torrino died quietly in 2003, still teaching Bruce Lee's principles to new security professionals. Bruce Lee himself died just 2.5 years after that. November evening, his physical body surrendering to mortality, even as his influence spread worldwide. But the principles he demonstrated in that 15-foot storage room, that technique can overcome size, that understanding can defeat assumption, that true strength lies in knowing when force is unnecessary. Those principles live on. The real fight that night wasn't between Bruce Lee and Anthony Torrino. It was between limitation and possibility, between the world as it appears and as it could be, between the prison of what we think we know and the freedom of what we might discover. In that fight, witnessed by 6 men in a Las Vegas storage room, possibility won, immortally. The bow tie was retied, the lesson absorbed, the secret kept. But the truth endures, that real strength isn't about domination. It's about understanding that true power isn't about force. It's about wisdom, that the greatest warriors help others discover capabilities they never knew they possessed. Some victories are measured in rounds, others in championships, but the victory that matters most is measured in the moment someone realizes they're stronger than they ever imagined possible. And that strength comes not from defeating others, but transcending their own limitations. In a storage room that no longer exists, in a hotel that lives only in memory, the impossible became inevitable, witnessed by 6 men who understood that legends aren't born from stories people tell, but from truths people discover when brave enough to question everything they thought they knew. That moment lasted 11 seconds. The truth it revealed is eternal.